Now that we've talked about annuities and we've talked a little bit about amortization, we're going to focus today on reading amortization schedules and how we can come up with these amortization schedules ourselves. So amortization schedules are tables that list how much of each payment is interest and how much goes into reducing the balance, as well as how much is owed after each payment. So although equal payments are made in order to amortize a loan, the loan balance does not decrease in equal steps, which is particularly important if a loan is paid off early. So having these tables, we're actually able to see the breakdown of how much of the payment, the equal payment you're making each month, how much of it actually goes towards the balance and how much of it goes towards interest. And obviously this is going to change if you are going to pay off the loan in a shorter time frame, then you'll have to pay less in interest and the breakdown is going to be different. So here's an example of an amortization schedule. You can see here across the top we have the payment number, we have the amount of the payment, the interest for the period, the portion to the principal, and the principal at the end of the period. So it looks like here we're starting off with the principal amount, which is $1,000 that's being paid off. You can see under amount of payment that those are all equal payments. But under interest for the period and the portion to the principal, you can see that the amount that you're paying here is going to be different. So this is a breakdown of that 88.85. So let's just go over, let's look at a specific row and take a look. So in this row, you're told the payment number. Here you have the actual payment amount, and of course we said this is equal payments, but the way that this equal payment is broken down is going to be different. So breaking down the payment into the amount that's the principal and which amount is interest. And then over here on the far right, we have the principal at the end of the period. So after you've made that payment, how much of the principal is still left. So you can see here how all of this is coming out. So if you look at payment number 1, we can see that the interest for the period is $10. And since the principal is $1,000, that looks like this is going to be 1% interest. Now because we are trying to break this down so that we have equal payments, that means $10 must be paid in interest for that period, and then $78.85. Now because the balance is now reduced, the amount of interest that's owed is also reduced. So now the interest is only $9.21 for that next period, and then that means that the remaining amount is $79.64. That goes towards the principal. And so that's how this goes down. As you continue all the way down, you can see that the interest is always off of the principal at the end of the previous period, and then the portion to the principal is simply what's remaining in order to pay it off. Now you can also see that we can easily find the total interest that's paid by simply summing up everything in that column, the interest for each period, and that will give us the total interest that's paid. Now, what if we want to come up with our own table because we want to compare if a certain number of payments are made versus another certain number of payments, what can you afford? What do you want to try to avoid in terms of how much interest do you want to avoid having to actually pay? So what we're going to do is we are going to create our own amortization schedule. So I've created a spreadsheet, a template to get us started, and I'm going to take you through how we're going to use this. Now, for our case, we're going to come up with an example. We're going to say that we have an annual interest rate of 7%, a loan term of 2. We're going to make monthly payments, that means 12 payments per year, and the loan amount is going to be $50,000. So here I'm going to go ahead and plug all those numbers in. So their annual interest rate, 0.07. All right, I changed that into a percent. And then I'm going to put in the loan term. So we're saying this is going to take 2 years. We said monthly payments, so that's 12 payments each year. And we said the loan amount is going to be $50,000. Okay, now let's go ahead and go down here, and we are going to fill in the payment periods. We're going to start with this one being 0. Now you could go through and write one all the way up to 24. I'm going to show you a trick that you can use in order to make it a little easier for you to fill this in, particularly if you want to extend this to, let's say, a loan term of 5 years. Then you're going to have to go from 0 all the way up to 60. And so this method will make it a lot easier, and it's actually one of the reasons why using a spreadsheet is going to be helpful. So in this case, the next cell is always going to be one more than the cell before it. So in here, I can write equals, and this cell here is A8, so I can put A8 in there. You can also type in A8, and it will highlight that cell. And we want to have it go up by 1. Okay, now we're not going to do that for every single one of them, but what you can do once you have that first one done is you want this to hold true as you continue down. So the next cell, you want it to use the cell above it plus 1, and then in the next one, the cell above it plus 1. So you see here, there's this little blue square that's in the bottom right corner. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on it and drag all the way down until you hit 24. Now, if you're not sure if you've hit 24 yet, you can always delete if you have too many. So for example, I go here. This ends up being exactly 24. But if you go past it, if you accidentally go past it, and now you have 27, you can simply go here and delete the ones that you don't need. And this also makes it easier if you go back and you want to use the same spreadsheet. If you do want to continue and say, okay, what if I paid this loan in 3 years instead? And you could go ahead and extend this down to 36. Okay, so now that we have our first column filled out, now we can move on. And now let's go to the interest rate per period. What is the interest rate per period? Well, remember, to find the interest rate per period, we take the interest rate and divide it by the number of payments per year, in this case 12. Now, instead of using 7 and 12, I want to relate it back to what I'm calling the input cells. So if I change the input cells, the entire amortization worksheet will change for me. So in here, I'm going to say this is going to equal what I have in C2, and I'm going to divide it by what I have in C4, the number of payments per year. Now you can see it highlights exactly what I've written here, and we can just hit enter, and that gives me the interest rate per period. Now the total number of periods, you know, is how long the loan is for, how many years that is, and the number of payments you make per year. Again, I could write 2 times 12 here, but in order to make it so that I don't have to constantly change these, all I have to do is change the input cells and it will automatically change the number of periods. So I'm going to say this is equal to what I have in C3, which is the 2 years, times what I have in C4, what I have in payments per year. And that will give me 24. So you can see now if instead I changed the loan term, let's say I made it 3 years, then I don't have to go here and change the total periods, it automatically updates it for me. All right, let's go back down here. So in this first row, we say the period is 0, so we haven't done anything yet. We just need to fill in the balance. So for payment, interest, and principal, I'm just going to put little dashes through it. Now, what is the balance? The balance is the loan amount, the initial loan amount. Now that's 50,000, and again, instead of trying to write 50,000 in here, I'm going to say this is equal to whatever the loan amount is, so whatever is in C5. So I'm going to write C5 in here. All right, now we're going to calculate the payment for the first period. Now, we're actually really just going to use the formula that we learned last time and put it in here. So we're trying to find R, the equal payments that need to be made. So in here, I'm going to write this is equal to C5 that's the loan amount, that's P, times the interest rate. Well, what's the interest rate? We found it over here in F2, okay? And then we're going to divide that whole thing by 1 minus, and then in here we're going to write 1 plus the interest rate, so that's F2, and we're going to raise that to the negative n being the total number of periods, which we found in F3. So we're going to raise this to the negative F3. Hit enter, and that's going to be the payment that needs to be made in that first period. Now, I don't want to have to write this all out for every single one, and the point of using the spreadsheet is to make it simpler. Now, the problem with simply saying, okay, I'm just going to take this and scroll it down, is what's going to happen. You're going to end up with all these issues because what this is doing is it's trying to take exactly the same thing as what you had in this first cell, and it's trying to basically shift everything down by 1. So what it ends up doing is, instead of actually trying to copy this exact number down, it's going to try to use the cells that you put in, C5 times F2, but now it's going to shift everything down. So it's going to try to say, okay, so this one must be C6 times F3 divided by 1 minus 1 plus F3 to the negative F4. That's not what you want. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to say, we're going to take this and we're going to set this equal to what I have in B9. I want this value. Now, if I were to take this and make it go all the way down, it's going to give me that same equal payment. Because now it's saying this, I want this to equal B9, and this one I want to equal B10, which is the same as B9. So then all your payments are the same. Now let's move on to the interest column. So in the interest column, we're going to say, okay, for the interest, I need to find, well, I know what the interest rate per period is. That's F2. And I'm going to multiply it by whatever the balance is. So that is the interest. Now, before I can actually copy this all the way down, the problem if I just simply copy this down is that I do want it to move that E8 down to the next one, because the balance is going to be different, which is going to change the interest. But the interest rate is going to stay the same. So the way that we can do this, the way that we can change this so that the interest rate stays the same, is we can change this F2, and in order to say keep F2, but E8 will shift down, is I'm going to put this dollar symbol in front of F and in front of 2. Now you can see that the answer here is still the same. It's still using F2, but now when I drag this down, I'll just drag it down 1. This is taking F2 still, but then using E9 instead of E10. So now you're going to multiply it by a different balance, but the interest rate is still the same. All right, so it's 0, 0, 0 right now because we actually have nothing in our balance here in E9. So let's continue filling the next column out. Now the principal amount is going to be what? It's going to be the amount that we're paying minus the interest. So this is going to equal whatever the payment is. So I'm going to write B9. That's the amount that I'm paying each month. And I'm going to subtract off the amount that we're paying in interest. So I'm going to put in C9. So subtracting those, that gives us the principal amount. And then how do you find the balance? What's left? Well, the balance is going to be equal to whatever the balance was before minus the amount of principal that's been paid. So since the balance was 50,000, we're going to start with that. So this is equal to E8, 50,000, and I'm going to subtract the principal amount that we paid, which in this case is D9. So our balance that's left is $48,053.04. So now you can see here that the interest has already been calculated now that we had a balance. So now this is 0.58% of that $48,053. So now what we can do is, since we want to fill this out for the entire thing, and we don't want to have to calculate the entire thing again for every single cell, we're going to highlight this. We're going to click on that blue square and drag it all the way down until we hit the 24th period. You can see here that the balance at the very end is 000, which is exactly what we would expect, that the balance is completely paid off. Now let's figure out this loan summary here. We want to know the total that's made in terms of payments and the total in terms of the interest. So to find this, well, the total in payments is going to be what? It's going to be the sum of all the terms from B9 to B32. Now you could do that. This is equal to the sum, and then you put parentheses, from B9, and then you put a colon, all the way to B32. And that will sum up everything that's in that range. Now that's fine, but if you wanted to keep this worksheet and you wanted to extend it to something further, and say you have more than just 24 payments, it's going to go further down. So if you want to make it so that it's actually a little bit easier to manage if you were to use this for another scenario, then what you can do is you can take, instead of the sum of a range, we can take the amount that's paid. So I'm going to make this, instead of this, equal the payment B9, and I'm going to multiply it by the number of periods that there are. And since I don't want to write 24 in here, because otherwise I'll have to change it, I want to simply multiply it by F3. That's the total periods. So if I multiply those, this ends up giving me the same exact answer, but now this can be more tailored to any other situation. All right, and then the total amount in interest, well, to find the total that's paid in interest, again, you could sum up all of the interest column. You could absolutely do that. I think it's actually more useful if we actually do it in terms of the total that's paid minus the original loan amount and write it in terms of that cell. So the total interest is equal to the total amount paid, which is this amount that we just found right above it. And then I'm going to subtract the original loan amount, which is what I have in C5. So if I subtract those two, that gives me the total amount that's paid in interest, which is equal to $3,727.09. Now this actually makes it very easy, once you have it filled out for your situation, to kind of play around with numbers. So say you had an annual interest rate instead of 7%, you can now just change what you have in the input cells and change this to 6%, and it changes everything for you. Right, so now you have the payment already calculated for you. You have the interest rate per period calculated for you. You can easily find the total amount that's paid, total interest. You can see for each pay period how much is interest, how much is principal. You can also be able to see, for example, if you knew that you would be able to save up a certain amount and pay off the balance by a certain year, you could see whether or not your current loan, the way it's currently set up, if you would be able to pay off the balance within a certain number of years. And again, this is all so that you can kind of change the numbers and everything else changes along with it. Now, if you, for example, say, let's say the loan term is going to be 3 years instead of 2, now the total periods is 36. Now, the only thing that you need to take care of here is you're going to need to extend this to go to 36. All right, and at 36, you can see here, now the balance is 000, and now we can look at the total payments, total interest, and it's automatically calculated for you.